Can you tell us what is the protocols of the elders of Zion and what are the protocols?
So the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is one of the most notorious anti-Semitic texts of the past 100 or 125 or so years. The book is a lie, but it tells a lie about a secret Jewish body called the Elders of Zion. This body never existed. And this book pretends to be, presents itself as the minutes of a secret meeting among this body, the Elders of Zion, where they are conspiring to control the world. So the Protocols plays on or advances a lot of very well-known anti-Semitic ideas like Jews control the media, or Jews control international banking, or Jews prefer a state of war to a state of peace. Jews want to destroy other world religions. All of these ideas can be found in the Protocols. It's a very difficult book to read. It's not well written. It's very difficult to understand as you read it, but that actually becomes part of its allure to people. Part of its attractiveness is this notion that here is this secret document that we've discovered. And this is how Jews talk to each other when non-Jews are not around. We've discovered their secret plans. So it plays into a very common and very popular way to spread anti-Semitism, which is through conspiratorial thinking.
So each protocol or chapter, if you will, of this supposed imaginary meeting talks about a different plan for world domination by this supposedly secret body of Jews. One chapter says that they plan to control the media and the press, all the sources of information for people around the world. Another says that they want to attack and get rid of the Catholic Church and its leader, the Pope. There's another one that says one prong is supposedly to control the finance system of the world and all banks. But perhaps the most enduring element, the one that is exploited a lot, is the idea that Jews are somehow warmongers, that they are fanning the flames of violence whenever there is a possibility, and that Jews benefit in some way from war among nations.
What can you tell us about the origin of the protocols, about the Russian newspaper Znamya, which originally published these articles?
Right. The Protocols were originally published in 1903 in a Russian newspaper called Znamya, or the banner, or the flag is how you would translate it. There was a great deal of popular unrest at this time in Russia that was threatening the Tsarist regime, and the secret police of the Tsar, a group known as the Okhrana, had a lot of influence in spreading these the hateful ideas that became the Protocols. They were circulating internationally at the time, really between France and Russia. You saw a number of anti-Semitic pamphlets published in Russia that were seeking to scapegoat Jews, to blame Jews for the unrest against the Tsar in Russia. Anti-Semitism was already widespread in Russia at that time, but conspiracy theories about Jews became popular and would thrive.
The editor of the newspaper that Danny described was a man named Pavel Khrushchevan. He was a very vocal and proud anti-Semite, an ultra-nationalist, a monarchist. in Tsarist Russia. And he is probably one of the major authors. There's not one author of the protocols because it's a sort of mishmash, pieced together text of various editions. But he published it in serial form in his newspaper in the town of Kishinev, which is now the capital of Moldova, then was part of the Russian Empire. And we know that Khrushchevan was one of the organizers or instigators of a pogrom, several-day event of mob violence, brutal, deadly mob violence against Jews in that place, in which some 49 Jews were beaten to death, attacked, murdered, and as many as 600 Jewish women were raped in gang rapes and mass attacks. And so for someone like this newspaper editor, the protocols, again, is useful. It is a kind of text that justifies the kind of violence that he encourages, that portrays Jews as a threat, not as inferior, but in fact as, in some ways, maybe superior to the point of danger, that they are some kind of superhuman force of evil that we need to eliminate, and that they are threatening and insidious and disloyal wherever they may live. So again, it's a useful text, an opportunist for people who already embrace hatred and want to spread it more.
So it's very much like mentioning the protocols in Hamas's charter that we're going to talk about later in the conversation.
Yeah, it serves a similar function. I mean, I can't speak to the motivations of what's in the heads of the people who publish it, but in terms of its utility in public opinion and in justifying, it has a similar function. The distinct difference in the Hamas charter is that when they put it into their charter, they're doing that with decades and decades of popularity and acceptance swirling around. So they're taking advantage of it. Whereas here in Kishinev and in other parts of the Russian Empire, they're establishing it rather than taking advantage of its enduring popularity.
Henry Ford is a very influential American in the early 20th century. He is an automaker who has transformed the way that transformed really the means of production. He buys a newspaper in Michigan called the Dearborn Independent. And within that newspaper, he starts to spread anti-Semitic lies. In the Dearborn Independent, Ford's newspaper, there's a series of 91 articles published, and he changes the name. It's not necessarily always the word for word of the protocols, but it's the ideas. He actually changes the title. The title when Ford produces this is called "The International Jew: The World's Problem." And in fact, that is a much clearer title than the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. People might hear the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and say, well, what's that? But when they hear the International Jew, the world's problem, as a journalist would say, the lead is not buried in that. And it plays on ideas that people who want to spread lies about Jews or explain a complicated world already have.
So in the period of the 1920s and 1930s, anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews, suspicion of Jews was very widespread. Henry Ford was not an outlier in this way, although he was extreme in his beliefs, and he also was a wealthy and powerful man who could spread these ideas in a way that most others couldn't. But one of the things that we see about not only anti-Semitism, but many forms of hatred is that they tend to flourish at times of uncertainty, fear, rapid change. So think about what's happening in the United States and in the world in the 1930s. It is the economic Great Depression. There are very, very deep and severe reverberations from the First World War, trauma, generation of young men wiped out or injured. There are a lot of things happening that leave people feeling very uneasy. And it is convenient to have some kind of group to blame for those problems and for those feelings of a threat and a direction that you don't know the world is going. When you look at how Ford repackaged and retitled the book as the International Jew. International is an insult, it's an epithet in that title. It leans into the idea that Jews are somehow not loyal to the nations where they live, but are in some way, and this is a term we hear now used as a substitute for it, globalist, that they are almost like a virus or a germ circulating around the world, insidious, invisible, secretly controlling things, as we said, like the banks, like the press, like culture, like real estate. And if you are a people who does not belong to any particular place without borders, you can be seen as kind of wandering anywhere.
It gets translated very quickly. You really see it spread widely in the 1920s throughout Europe and well beyond. Its Spanish editions are circulating through Central and South America, for example. By that point, we see many German editions that become influential to Nazis. And it's not only the protocols that get translated, but Ford's compilation of articles, The International Jew, also gets translated. So we see this with, we see these ideas under a few different titles. But by the 1920s, you can find editions of protocols in dozens of languages around the world, making it as far as South America, as far as Japan, and throughout Europe and the Middle East and the United States as well.
And I guess including Germany.
Yes. So the protocols. There are multiple editions of the protocols circulating in Germany, multiple printings, even before the Nazis, before Hitler becomes chancellor in 1933. This is an inspirational book for them. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda, writes in his diary in 1924, so 9 years before Hitler becomes chancellor, that basically the extent of what he's saying is, well, the protocols might be a forgery, but they're useful to us. And Hitler writes in Mein Kampf, in his autobiography that he writes in prison, that once the protocols become more well known around the world, the Jewish conspiracy will be broken. So even though the book, most Nazi leaders know that the book is a fraud, they'll use it when it's effective for them to use it. And some of the most virulently anti-Semitic newspapers in Nazi Germany will cite the protocols or the ideas behind the protocols more often, even though you don't hear it that often, cited by Hitler himself.
One of the things that is really central to Nazi anti-Semitism is that it's an opportunist anti-Semitism. The Nazis' main form of Jew hatred was a racist and racial one that defined Jews on a supposedly biological basis of inferiority, but they were more than happy to embrace other forms of Jew hatred when it served their goals. So, for example, Christian anti-Semitism, which was rooted in another lie, a lie that the Jews had killed Jesus, was not a central component of Nazi ideology, but they knew that it was widespread among people across Europe and exploited that, and were very happy for that to be a reason that not only Germans, but Christian people in countries conquered by Germany might be agreeable and might go along with their plan or not help their Jewish neighbor. So the protocols is sort of similar to that. It's not a central text for the Nazis, but it's useful for them. And they are opportunistic and will use whatever tool is effective in whatever place is effective.
The Nazis, at times in their propaganda, want to position themselves as defending themselves against Jews. destroy the Jews before the Jews destroy us. Now, there is no plan among Jews to take over Germany at the time or to take over the world, but they can cite the notion in the protocols that there is this secret Jewish body that's pulling the strings of the world somehow, that ultimately they want to destroy Germany, and that therefore Nazi Germany must destroy the Jews first. This notion of Germany, even in its murderous plans, defending themselves against Jews, is a thread that you see running through their propaganda. And did they need the protocols for that? Maybe not. I don't think Nazi history would have changed significantly without the protocols. But again, it's a convenient text to cite. Even though, as I said, the leaders of some of the highest leaders of the Nazi Party realize that this is a forgery, they also realize it's useful to accomplish their murderous goals.
As you know, we're going to translate this video into Persian as a video and an article. And as you know, there are several editions of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in Persian and in Arabic. I was counting it the other day. There are at least 5 different editions in Persian, different translations, but I'm sure there are more because I know about a couple of more and I couldn't find it on the internet. What would you tell someone, especially a young person, who's going to buy and read this book?
Most important thing I would tell them is that it's a lie, right? And that you can't believe everything that you read. I think I would tell them to consider the source, right? Who is publishing this book? What other kind of activities does that person or group participate in that promotes hatred of Jews and other groups throughout the world? So I think often we still, even though we see people more and more skeptical of what they read or the photographs that they see, there's something alluring about this notion of a book. Well, it must be true because it's published, and so look deeply at who's publishing this, where does it come from, what is the funding behind that publication, and what are the other projects of that organization.
And Edna, imagine you're talking to a young Iranian who's reading the book.
I would say to them, don't be fooled. Similar to what Danny said, who is asking you to read this, and why is it convenient or useful for them to distract you or to have you believe that what is in it is true? Also, to look back at the history of this book and how many versions of it there are, how it is constantly changing. It's not as though someone's saying, look back at the Bible or the Quran or some text that has stayed more or less constant over a long time. The fact that it is constantly shape-shifting shows you that it is not some kind of proof text of anything, but in fact, it is a useful vehicle for hatred, and that it changes based on what is needed. So many more recent versions of the protocols incorporate elements related to the Holocaust or to the state of Israel that just has, no relation to when it was first published, because it was published decades and decades before either of those events took place. So I think, asking them to look at why it was rewritten, who did it, and how they are being duped, how they are being used. And people are hoping that they will swallow this lie whole, and that they are smarter than that.
Of course, after October 7, many people heard that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is part of the Hamas's charter. What does it say about a group that has such a lie in its charter years after it's proven that it's fabricated, that it's a lie, that it's plagiarized? What do you think it can tell you about Hamas or any other group that may have the protocols as part of its charter?
I think it tells us two things about Hamas. One, that Hamas is not only anti-Israel, but anti-Jewish, that they would like to see every Jewish person in the world killed, and that the existence of the state of Israel is only the beginning of their goals. And it's not me saying that, they say that. But the second, again, is that the Protocols is a text that is exploited and used by opportunists. Hamas, whoever wrote their charter, and knows that the Protocols is a mainstream text throughout not only the Arab world, the Islamic world, and that by putting it in their mission statement, that they are appealing to wide swaths of millions of people who either believe in its truth or believe that elements of it are there. And it is a way to gain sympathy and common cause with Hamas's actions. And we see this, it's not a fringe activity. We have in our collection, for example, an edition of the Protocols published in English, interestingly, given out by Saudi officials to foreign visitors in the late 60s or early 70s. So this was intended for external consumption, but from Saudi officials. About 20 years ago, the government-sponsored TV station in Egypt produced a mini-series based on the Protocols, knowing it would be a hit, that it would be popular. And the U.S. State Department condemned it as a form of hatred, of anti-Semitic hatred. It's in the school books around the world. So it's a way for Hamas to align itself, whatever their terrorist actions and methods, with much broader trends that are accepted by a wider range of people, including people who are not themselves violent in their daily lives. But it gives Hamas some kind of cover.
It allows Hamas to sometimes put themselves again in that notion, in a defensive posture, right? Saying we're defending the world from this conspiratorial body of Jews who wants to take over the world and must be destroyed before they do take over the world. I think that is again, that's a seductive lie that Hamas is helping to spread by including this in its charter.
One other element of the Protocols that Hamas is latching onto is the idea that you cannot take anything that Jews say at face value, according to this version. That, as Danny said at the opening of this conversation, if the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is supposedly the secret record of what Jews say when they are alone, when others are not listening, this, by definition, means everything that comes out of the mouth of Jewish individuals, of the Jewish state, must be a lie, that they are manipulating us, according to this version, and that they cannot be trusted. So it goes to that conspiracy theory, suspicion element, and that is very, very useful to Hamas, as we see in their propaganda wars now also with Israel, and in denying atrocities that they've committed, that they don't want anything that any Jewish official says to be taken at face value, and the Protocols feeds into that version.